Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Good morning, everyone. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection, with another very important subject. The emphasis of this platform is to educate on relevant issues, is to celebrate accomplishments, and to connect the community. So the name of the show today is Voting. Voting, its price and its process. I believe that when we talk about voting, we cannot neglect or overlook the fact that a price has been paid regarding voting. And sometimes, I was thinking as I was coming to the studio, it almost seems like the later you are born, the better the situation you are born into. I don't know if that makes sense. I would not have liked to live in the 1910s in Mexico. Have you?
No, I wouldn't either.
Yeah, so it seems like, that democracy, our democracy keeps getting better, and it should get better. So we have three guests today to help us address the issue of voting, its price and process. Before I introduce them, actually, let me introduce them real quick. To my left, we have Matt Roberts, and Matt is the Director of Communications with the Secretary of State, Michelle Reagan.
Yeah.
So here it is, Matt. Thank you so much. Welcome to our show.
Thanks. I get called a lot of things, and Director of Communications is probably the nicest one. But we do a lot of stuff and a lot of interesting work when it comes to the world of elections. Mm-hmm. We have a great many other responsibilities, but I think most people recognize the Secretary of State's office as is involved in elections in some way.
Am I correct that the Secretary of State becomes the governor if for whatever reason the governor cannot continue governing?
Yeah, so in Arizona we don't have a lieutenant governor, mm-hmm. and what we do have is the Secretary of State becomes the acting governor whenever the governor leaves the state, and the governor leaves the state quite frequently. And if everything goes well, you never know that Secretary Reagan is actually the governor. So it's a unique part of the job. There's only 3 or 4 secretaries around the state that occurs to, but it's an interesting part of the job for her.
Very briefly, what are some of the areas that the secretary is responsible for, obviously including elections?
Yeah, actually, our elections division is the smallest division of the Secretary of State's office. We only have about 8 to 10 employees. The rest of the Department of State includes the state library system. We're responsible for the state archive. We have a Capitol Museum, a business services division where we process notaries and things like that. So we're a fairly good-sized state agency, but elections, I think, generally is why people recognize the Secretary of State.
Interesting. Thank you, Matt, for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And to my left also, we have Alicia Contreras. Yeah, Alicia, you are with Mi Familia Vota. And can you explain to us what you do for them and what is the role, the function of Mi Familia Vota, and how pretty much does Mi Familia Vota carry out its mission, its functions?
Well, thanks for having us here today. Again, Alicia Contreras. I am the National Organizing Coordinator with Mi Familia Vota. So home in Arizona. So excited to be here with you. We are a national nonprofit that organizes with the community, making sure that we're working with the Latino community and allies to promote civic engagement and social justice within our communities. We do through the electoral process all the way through, from helping individuals come from natural permanent residents to naturalized citizens, engaging them to register to vote, and then the educational piece that's happening out on the ground, on the doors with them, why it's important to vote for their school boards, why it's important to vote for their Secretary of State, all the way up and down the ballot.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So you do events, you do house to house. How do you carry out your work?
We have a leadership development program where we're engaging youth in high schools and in the universities, community colleges. We do naturalization workshops where we communicate with legal permanent residents to to take the step to become naturalized citizens. We help them through that process. And then we do voter registration out at community events. We go out into the high schools. We're out on the doors with them. And then we have the conversations on the doors as we do community canvases. Do you know there's an election coming? Did you know this is a primary election? What does it mean to vote in the midterm election? We do not tell them how to vote, but the importance of voting.
Right. Do you see within the Latino community, especially new voters, an increase in people becoming from permanent residents to U.S. citizens and then registering to vote and then actually voting?
There's definitely an increase. So we saw a large increase back in 2016, and it's continuing to go. The number of individuals that are eligible to vote, specifically within the Latino community, is around 21% that's eligible to vote. We make up 31% of the state. So this is important that we are having those conversations. As we talk to folks, we're not only voting, they don't only vote for themselves, they vote for their communities, they vote for their families and friends. And so there's definitely been an influx.
Okay, perfect. And talking about Mr. Fontes, Adrian Fontes, Maricopa County recorder. Yes. So that tells me there's a recorder in every county.
That's right. There's 15 of us.
15 of you. We have 15 counties in Arizona. Welcome, Mr. Fontes. It's always a pleasure having you. Can you tell us just a little bit about what your office does?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me, and thanks for bringing me with this particular group for this discussion. Yeah, the county recorder is a very, very old office under the legal systems that we have. And there's 15 of us in Arizona. And we do two major functions regarding sort of the rights of citizens and people that live here. First and foremost is on the recording side, we record deeds and property transfer documents regarding real property, liens on property, things of this nature, so that folks can exercise those rights to own property, which is really a premier right for a free people, right? In its individual capacity to own property, and then defend those rights through the recording side of the house.
Okay.
And then also every county has an election department. In Maricopa County, the election department is assigned via charter to my office. And so I operate all of the elections in Maricopa County on the administration side, right? The Secretary's office is responsible for making sure that we follow all of the rules and regulations as they do with all of the other counties. So their strong role in elections is really an oversight role. Ours is the managerial and administration role on the ground. And so our election department has a warehouse down on 3rd Avenue in Lincoln. We do all early voting. We do all voter registration at the county level. And then we also run deployment for everything that has to do with Election Day voting as well.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. When it comes to voting, I have to kind of study every issue to put together this any show, and it's many hours of reading and kind of doing a little bit of research. And many of the issues that we address in this platform basically forces you to come back to the Constitution. Because to study the Constitution is to study the history of this nation. To study voting even will drive you to the Constitution and the amendments, etc. So let me just provide some definitions, and then we'll get to the history and the price that has been paid for us to vote so freely today. And I mean, I have to say it, we vote freely today thanks to many who paid a very, very high price before. Democracy. Democracy, the definition is a system of government by the whole population or all the eligible members of a state, typically through elected representatives. Another definition, representative government, elective government, self-government, government by the people. It's a republic, it's a commonwealth. A democracy is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. This is beautiful.
Yeah, that's poetry.
It's beautiful. We just need to, and I'll get to that point in just a bit. Not everything is so beautiful, huh? I guess. Voting, the definition of a democracy has voting in it. A democracy is a government in which the supreme power is vested in the people and exercised by them directly or indirectly through a system of representation usually involving elections. The preamble of the Constitution, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. So I think they understood that the union is a work in progress, right? And let us come to the history. We still have about 5 minutes in this segment. In history, there seems to always be a question, a struggle of about who should vote. Let's spend a few minutes reviewing that history. What are some of the takeaways, the learnings, and if you can review, anyone, that history of voting in the United States of America.
Well, I'll start just briefly. I know that the history of voter registration in this country has certainly evolved over its history and made certain progress from the early days of our founding fathers when our settlers got to this part of the planet. For one of the first things they did was to hold an election, and since there's been a variety of different policies and procedures that people have put into place to allow certain people to vote, and that was certainly controversial throughout the history of our country. For much of our history, probably, if you really think about until the 1960s, portions of our citizens couldn't participate in elections, and there was laws specifically created to disenfranchise some of those folks. Mm-hmm. And over that period of time, the government has taken, in some people's minds, glacial steps to allow certain other folks to participate. Obviously, the civil rights movement allowed for African Americans to participate, and in addition to that, women to be able to vote in the 1920s. So it's really evolved over the years, and I think we're in a position now where we have elected officials and government folks that are interested in improving turnout. I know, speaking from myself, and I know the county recorder as well, and our friends at Mi Familia Vota are always, the first thing out of their mouths always is, how can we improve turnout? And I think we're always looking to the legislative process to make it easier through online voter registration, perhaps, and other ways that we have an election right now where people can vote by mail.
And we're going to get to all those nitty-gritty items, definitely.
So in terms of history, I think the country continues to evolve, and I think there's always room to grow, and I'm sure we will continue to grow.
Yeah. Before we go on break, let me come back to you, Mr. Fontes. I believe you said, who do you think you are not to vote? And I think that...
Yeah, the last time we were here.
Yeah, meaning that, with the high price that other generations have paid.
Right, and that's important. I mean, if you look at the idea of voting, really, I like to take a step back whenever I look at anything and say, what exactly is it? Well, the idea of a government is to decide what to do with the pool of resources that everyone puts in, right? And so in our system, what we had was essentially taxes. Right, we need roads. Somebody needs a bridge over this river. We need to have some whatever. So folks would put their resources into a pile, and then the folks who were putting resources in were the ones who got to decide. Now, landowners at one point were the only ones who were really paying taxes because they were the ones who were utilizing those resources. They owned everything.
Right.
And as the ownership and the taxation evolved into including more people were demanding the right to vote. So really, a lot of this is kind of an economic question as well. So really, when you look at voting, what is it? It is a form of decision-making, and that's why democracy, for our country is a constitutional republic by definition, but we use this system of democracy within the republic. Okay, so when you look at the history and the evolution of voting, what you're looking at is the history and the evolution of power. You're looking at the history and the evolution of economic power. You're looking at the history and the evolution of cultural power. And that really has expanded beyond very specific, narrow groups. And that hasn't expanded except by painful process sometimes. You get to the idea of who has, or the prices that we've paid. All you've got to do is look at, photographs of people getting blasted with water cannons in the street and having dogs loosed upon them, churches being bombed, children being killed. That has happened here in America, here in the United States. Lynchings didn't just happen in the South to black folks. There were brown folks here in Arizona who got strung up by trees. And a lot of this has to do with this struggle over power, economic power, cultural power, and governmental power generally.
Pretty complex equation.
It's incredibly complex, but at the end of the day, when you look at it by how are we going to distribute the resources that we pull together, when you have that sort of 90,000-foot view of things, it gets a little easier to understand overall.
Thank you. We have to go on our first break. You're listening to AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. The subject today, voting, its price and process. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. The subject today is voting, its price and process. Not a simple thing. I believe there's all kinds of elections, and we're going to get to that probably on the last segment. And sometimes it's even hard to keep up with the different, federal, state, county, cities, and all kinds of things. And hopefully we'll get some tips as to how to stay on top of those issues. I would like to come back in just a couple more minutes to touch upon these concepts of who originally was allowed to vote and what were the factors for not allowing others to vote, and then how those factors were taken away, and then that opened the door for more to come in, if we can continue with that kind of approach.
Yeah, so, and I'll toss it over in a minute, but at the end of the day, what you usually have, and it's a pattern that's emerged all over the world really, but specifically here in the United States, is you start with a specific small group of folks who have power and they really don't want to give it up, right? And that's just kind of how it is, right? You know, when you've got a bunch of kids in your house and they're growing up, they start making decisions and you start pushing against it. So you can kind of think of it as that sort of paternalistic attitude that people have towards folks who haven't been used to making decisions, like your kids. Right, they're
not mature enough. They don't know what they're doing.
They don't know what they're doing. I mean, look, back in the day, women weren't allowed to vote because voting happened in the basements of churches and in beer halls where people would get in fistfights. And so it was impolite, which was one of the big defenses against letting women vote, was that it was too rough and too raucous. Right. You know, and we didn't have secret ballots back in those days. So it was really, some of these excuses can be really silly. Like when your kids are growing up, you know they're smart, you know they can kind of handle themselves, but you still want to protect them. So that paternalistic attitude is what has kept some groups to try to keep power.
Religion was another factor.
Certainly.
At some point. Gender, as you were saying. Race was definitely another factor. At one point, I believe only white, Protestant, males who own land, I believe. That's how originally, I believe, it started. White males who were Protestant and they had land. And then gradually the requirements to own land was taken away, and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah, and interestingly, you have all kinds of variations in there as well, and there's exceptions, right? At one point in the late 1800s, 21 or 22 of our states allowed for alien suffrage. And it wasn't until 1926 that Arkansas was the last state to deny non-citizens the right to vote, right? We think of it as, wow, citizens have always only been the ones able to vote. That's just not true. So everything has shifted and changed. Some people are more, so it's not always an expansive exercise.
Right.
We have in many ways continued to contract it, and sometimes very inappropriately.
Right. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I was just going to add, just because it's to Adrian's point, when government does get involved and takes a more active role in expanding voting rights to people, you see an immediate improvement in terms of a turnout. So in the South, once the 1965 Voter Rights Act was passed, voter registration amongst African Americans in the South raised generally 30 to 40%. And over the first 3 years where the Voter Rights Act was passed, we saw more than 1 million people in the South become registered. So it just goes to show that when government can get involved and act in a way that embraces citizens, it can really help turnout and help other people participate in the government that in some way represents them.
And talking about women now, you are a woman, and do you feel anything? Do you sense that in the community? I mean, it's hard to believe that the women, I think it took about the first time that a bill or the concept of allowing women to vote was introduced, and then it took like 113 years after that. After the first attempt failed, it took about 113 years to then allow for us to allow women to vote. That was pretty crazy, but it's a fact. Any thoughts in what you see in the community as you carry out voting efforts? Registration efforts.
Well, we see women are coming out in record numbers. We are the ones that are registering individuals to vote. We're the ones having the coffee and the house meetings and the conversations with our friends and family about, hey, do you know why you shouldn't vote? Or are you registered to vote? Why aren't you registered to vote?
Right.
Women are the ones that are volunteering to get involved with a lot of the community organizations to get out the vote, to talk about the importance of registering. So it says a lot. It has a lot to be said across the country, and specifically in Arizona, that the women are doing the turnout. Women are on the doors and in your face about it.
Maybe
and
that's why they were holding off before giving them the right. They knew it, huh?
I mean, we're coming up on 100 years for us to be able to vote, and as women of color also are going to be out there.
Man, I'm telling you, it's. I mean, history is just amazing. There is the concept of electoral college votes versus the popular votes. So not just anybody who gets all the votes wins. We have a system of voting called the electoral college. Just briefly, I know you're laughing. I don't know why.
So, well, I'm laughing because it's funny. The first president, or the first presiding officer over America's government, was named John Hanson. He was the president of Congress. And so really what you're looking at is the presiding officer, because the Electoral College only applies to that one office. There's one office because that is the executive, Article 2 power in the Constitution. So the Electoral College is like this. Basically what it means is we're going to send some folks over to Washington, D.C. to tell the government who it is that Arizona wants to become the president. That's what the Electoral College is. So we're electing electors. We're not electing a president. It's technically the electors who cast the vote for president. Okay. Now, in most states, you have this commitment, right? Okay. You have to go with what the state votes for. So if the majority of people vote for a Donald Trump versus a Hillary Clinton, then the electors are obligated to cast their ballot for
But not in
Donald
every
Trump.
state.
Well, I think it is every state now, but it didn't used to be that way. And as a matter of fact, it didn't used to be. There's a lot of stuff that didn't used to be.
So some of the electors would go and maybe they could even change their vote from what the state had.
Yes, and one of the reasons that happened to be was we really didn't want to elect a politician. We wanted to elect an administrator.
Right.
We wanted to have someone to preside, president, over the government.
Right.
We wanted someone who wasn't super political or wasn't super out there, and so the founders said, let's send our best and brightest from this group or that group, and among them, they can get together in Washington, D.C., and the best and brightest can among themselves figure out who's going to end up becoming the president. And then, of course, politics being what it is, really early on in the Republic, we had these commitments. If you send me to D.C., I will vote for you.
Right.
And so that's what ended up happening.
So is a number of electors equates to the number of votes that each state is granted? Is that the same number?
I think it's
because
the number of
in the
representatives and
Electoral
senators.
College,
It changes.
Okay, I have notes here. There's 538 electors represent the states, 435 representatives, 100 senators, and 3 D.C. electors. Each state has a number.
Yes.
And
the number is equivalent to the number of representatives. So Arizona has 9 congressmen, 9 representatives, 2 senators, so that makes 11.
Okay.
So out of that 538, Arizona has 11.
Okay. And then you need 270 to win. And I understand that if there's a tie, then it goes to the House of Representatives to make a decision to get like another kind of election, if you will, where you have every state vote, and then the same process is followed by for the vice president, but then that one is taken care of at the Senate.
Right.
So that's pretty much how. So just in the last 2 minutes that we have, I heard, especially in the last election, that a lot of people were not satisfied. There was a lot of fighting, if you will, with the electoral college and versus the popular vote. Where do you think we're moving? Are we going to continue to use that? Is there any traction to moving more to a different system?
I'll take that. There is a lot of folks out there that feel like a national popular vote would be better representative of what the country feels about any particular candidate. I'm not. I think, generally speaking, every presidential cycle that there's a race that ends up being a popular vote being one direction and the electoral college being the other direction, you're going to hear from the folks that aren't happy with the outcome of the election that they want to move towards a national popular vote.
Right.
Oddly enough, our office oversees the electoral college meeting that happens in December, where those 11 electors come together and cast their vote for the Electoral College, and then we certify that result and send it off to D.C. So the Electoral College is, I think, an important part of our democracy, and I think people will continue to discuss the merits of an Electoral College, and it's interesting to see that that's what stood the test of time so far. So
right.
I guess we'll see moving forward.
Now, coming to you, Alicia, I mean, you do the actual work, you talk to people, you help them register, etc.
That's right. We'll talk about it. She'll actually do it.
Well, she's the director. Now, let me ask you. We only have about a minute and a half before we go on our next break. I have to believe that there are a lot of people who believe, and I think all of us, in addition to voting, we have to be educated voters. Is there any work in your organization that addresses that, the need to be educated voters?
Definitely. We continue to make sure that we are doing the full cycle of the voter process, and we want to make sure that they are educated on which positions and what positions are where, who's up for election, and not so much are they holding, how do we hold them accountable, and that they are making sure that they are relaying the needs of the community. And if they aren't, then the community has a decision. Is that the best person to represent them? We just lay the facts based on the issues. How are they doing on the environment? How are they doing on immigration, social justice, workers' rights? What does that look like on the education front? And that's where the education we do with the community works. It's a key point of talking about why it's important to vote and how their voices can be uplifted. If we think about the midterm elections, that is something where we see the drop-off rate. Folks are not participating.
We need to talk a little bit about that in the next segment. I think it's super important. We have to go on our second break. This time flies. Thank you. Stay with us. This is AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Amazing subject. I keep saying that this show is great, but not because of anything other than our guests. Our guests make the show very, very engaging and informative. Let's go right straight to the issue, the census. Every 10 years, the United States carries out a census, and it's coming. The last one was 2010. What is the connection, the relationship between census and voting?
Well, the relationship between census and resources really is the important thing.
Okay.
So there's 435 members of Congress. Every state gets 2 senators. But that 435 is not going to increase. Now, when you live in Arizona and you've seen the significant increase in our population over the last 10 years, what you're talking about is the potential for Arizona to pick up one, and some people even estimate maybe a second congressman. So we could theoretically go from 9 to 11, probably 9 to 10.
And how is that
the only way they do that is by counting.
So
right?
if there are more
census.
people,
if there's more people here, then what they do is they give us more congressmen. So there are some states with only one congressperson. They have 2 senators, but they only have 1 congressperson because their population is so small.
Right.
For those states, that's not going to change.
Right.
But that's why I think California has like 50-something Congress people because they have a huge population. Now, if Arizona doesn't count all of its people, if we fail to execute a census properly, we may lose out on our representation in Congress per people. And it's not citizens, because guess what? Everybody drives on the same roads. Everybody, pays into taxes. Everybody does all this stuff.
Right.
And so those federal dollars have less likelihood of coming back to us, right? Because we're paying them anyway.
Right.
So we need that representation. That's why the census is so important.
Does the Secretary of State does anything related to the census?
Actually, we're related to the census in one important way, and it plays off of the recorder's point, is that we actually lead the beginning of the redistricting of Arizona's congressional districts. So if we were to be lucky enough to get one or perhaps even two more congressional seats, that begins the process of redistricting in Arizona.
Is that a quick process?
No, gosh. I think we just settled one of the last lawsuits from the last redistricting of Arizona.
So then the whole state gets redistricted.
Correct. So the Independent Redistricting Commission takes on the role of designing and implementing new congressional districts. They work with our counties because there's a great many rules and regulations related to how you create districts and what they need to look like and how they're actually put together. And it's quite a long process. Like I mentioned, it's almost a 10-year process because the census occurs, redistricting starts, and then you inevitably in almost every state have lawsuits based on those decisions.
Now, Alicia, coming back to you, I don't know if it's final. It seems to be like it's final, that there's going to be a question about citizenship. Is it final yet, or is still I think they're still in the process.
I don't think it's final yet.
Okay, so let's say it's not, but if it was, do you feel, you work with the Hispanic community, do you think that's going to deter people from actually participating? That's kind of like that concern.
It's definitely put there as a deterrent. It's what is the piece there that we are talking about? Who's residents, who's living in the state to have higher access to resources. So community organizations are not going to allow it to deter communities. We need to do a full on about the education piece of why it's important to be counted and how that will impact their students, their roads, their families. And that is the piece as we talk about the possible 1 to 2 congressional representatives, redistricting, and being a huge piece to that. Communities are currently fighting this, but it is sent there to be a deterrent, and we're hoping to make sure the community knows that it doesn't matter. We still need to make sure you are being counted. How are you important in the community is very much so, as we saw what's happening in California with the lawsuit that's going.
Do you think we the people don't really understand the significance of being counted, and that's why perhaps we just said, "Oh, forget it. It doesn't really matter." Or I assume that we need to do more education on what the meaning of being counted is. What is the repercussions of not being counted?
There are definitely the repercussions of not being counted, but think about what the community has gone through over the last couple of years. Specifically, the Latino community has been under attack, and so it's this piece of opportunity for them, or unfortunate opportunity, that we don't want them to go into the shadows. We don't want them to not be counted and to not uplift their voices. They are taxpayers, they are good people, and they're here and they have opportunities to be counted, to make sure that their communities and their families are counted. Think about all the mixed status families,
right.
And that's the piece that we're trying to make sure.
And I'm probably going to do a show just on the census, just on that issue alone. Let's move on. I care about elections. I care about the country. I'm a U.S. citizen, but I know I have a hard time. I'm an informed person, if you will, but I still have a hard time following elections and knowing the different kinds of elections. Can you help us understand from the very top to the very bottom, what are the different levels of elections that we have in this country?
So when I look at the top of elections, I see what's closest to me.
Okay.
What is most important to me? And that is my schools, my roads, and my community. That's where I live. That is what is closest to me. Now, when I see a bunch of different stuff on TV and the internet and the news media, they're telling me something different. But when I walk out my front door and talk to my neighbor, it's the streets, it's garbage collection, it's the schools. Those are the things that are closest to me and so most important to me.
Wow.
So what I do is I pay attention to my school board race. I pay attention to who's my justice of the peace.
Wow.
I pay attention to my county board of supervisors, because that's where the vast majority of my tax dollars are going. We all pay our income taxes and we do this and that and the other. And a lot of that stuff floats off to Washington, D.C. and does these big, giant things. But at the end of the day, are your roads being paved? Is your garbage getting picked up? Is your water clean that's coming out of the faucet? Right? Is your community safe? Right? These are the most closest to me. So when you say top to bottom, when I talk to people, I say
you're bottom to top.
I'm talking about top to bottom. What is closest to me and my family and the people that I love? It's that stuff. So from my perspective, the vernacular top to bottom means, the president and the Senate and the Congress, and then everybody stops. It's like, wait a minute.
Okay, so
that's not how I see it.
Let's make it a little bit more practical. I want to follow all the elections. I want to participate in all the elections that I need to. So I know the presidential is pretty clear, pretty straightforward. Then comes the congressmen's, and that's only by district. Am I correct?
Right.
So when it comes to senators, that's statewide. When it comes to congressmen, that's district-wise.
Right.
So each district elects their own representatives. What's the next level after the congressmen that we should be aware?
Well, I would immediately start to talk about state legislature and statewide elected officials like my boss.
The state of the Secretary of State.
Secretary of State, the governor, the Attorney General. People have the opportunity to make a difference in elections within the state. And to the recorder's point again, which is absolutely I 100% agree with, is that politics is local. I think I've heard that somewhere before. And if people want to make a change, those are the elections that they need to be getting involved in. And what we always see year after year is that we have great turnout. In Arizona, we had pretty substantial turnout in the last presidential election cycle. But then it drops off in the midterms, and it drops off even more in statewide elections that aren't in August or November, and even less so during local elections. And it's a big concern.
I am a very systematic person. I like to do everything in order, but sometimes let's just break that order right now. The primary election, some people, how is our state, how does our state handle the primaries? I know I have heard that the primaries, if you register Republican, you cannot.
So we have an open primary system in our regular elections. Not the presidential preference election. Let's put that one on the side for a minute.
Okay.
But in our regular partisan elections, particularly for state, house, and Senate, countywide races, some municipalities, although I can't think of any off the top of my head that are partisan, they're statewide races. So the vast majority of races, we have open primaries. What that means is if you've got an R behind your name, you vote for the R's. If you've got a D, you vote for the D's. If you don't have an affiliation with a political party, you can pick one side or the other to vote with. So that's for U.S. Senate, U.S. Congress, all the statewide, governor, treasurer, mine inspector, all of the state senators, state representatives, and so on and so on. Now, as for the presidential preference election, that is, again, unique. And in that election, the way the law stands today, independent voters are barred from voting. You have to have been registered with a party. Now, if you ask me why, the answer is because that's what the law says. My personal view on that is if the taxpayers are paying for the election, which we are, then the taxpayers should be able to vote, which they can't. Especially if you're not a partisan taxpayer.
Repeat that you said about the presidential.
So the presidential preference election, which is the seminal moment in Arizona elections over the last generation, right? In March of 2016, a lot of people got angry because the nonpartisan voters, right, independent or non-party affiliated voters, could not vote. They were barred from voting because that's what the law says, right? Not because that's what the election people said or something like that. That's what the law says.
That's to elect the president?
That is that's the difference again.
Okay.
Remember we talked about the electoral college and how we don't actually vote for president.
Right.
We vote for someone to vote for president.
Right.
That's the same type of weirdness with the partisan preference election. That's why it's not called a presidential primary.
Okay.
PPE stands for presidential preference election. So what it does is it says exclusively within the parties and not to include any independents or nonpartisan people. So exclusively within the party that you're registered with, you get to tell the delegation who your preference is.
Got it.
Okay, so that's why it's different, and that's why it happens in March, not in August.
Okay, we only have a couple more minutes before we go on our last break. I want to keep track of the presidential elections. The presidents, they have their own pages. I can go to them and kind of see what they stand for. The state congressmen, same thing. Senators, they have their own pages. What happens at the? What kind of information that the Secretary of State has in its website?
Yeah, it's been a big priority of my boss to actually create a dedicated elections website that we've plainly named Arizona.vote. Because we had one of those horrible web addresses, azsos.gov.
So that would cover every election that happens in the state?
Yeah, essentially what we do is we target the next election people are going to be thinking about. So right now, we have an election coming up in the west side of Phoenix.
Ooh,
that page is Arizona.vote, and it just gives information about that election. And then the day after that election, we'll probably post some results on that page, but then we'll start to think about the May local elections, and we list out information. I know Maricopa has a similar situation. They have Maricopa.vote, and then we have the Citizens Clean Elections Commission, and they put out information on their website. So there's a great number of places people can access information, including third parties like Mi Familia, who actually, I'm sure, put information on their website about upcoming elections.
That will be like a one-stop shop kind of thing, right?
We tried to make it as easy as possible for people to locate information, because we had this horrible government website which made it very difficult, 15, 20 different clicks just to find out when you could register.
Have to work on that. And there's so much investment, and it is so difficult just to vote. Now we're moving in the realm of being educated to vote, which is a whole another realm that we need to tackle. We have to go on our last break. Stay with us. This is AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Subject today, voting, its price and process. We have addressed a bit of both, and let's continue. There's the step of registering to vote, which you do, Mi Familia Vota does a lot of, and then actually voting. Can you help us understand those concepts about what are the options that people have to register and to actually vote here in Arizona?
So Mi Familia Vota is engaging folks who have more access to voting. So we want to make sure that they can register at our offices. They can register with any of our folks out on the field. If you see them in the streets, they'll definitely register you to vote.
This is
a paper form.
Paper form. Usually that's how you carry out most of your voter registration.
Most of our voter registration is the paper form. Folks will get the receipt end of the copy, so they know which form was theirs. They have access that they should be receiving information from the recorder's office that they have been registered to vote.
Are people able to register online if they wanted to?
Yes, they are. They're able to register online.
Is that the website with the Department of Motor Vehicles?
ServiceArizona.com.
ServiceArizona.com.
Right. You can get there through either Arizona.vote at the Secretary of State's office. You can get there through Maricopa.vote at my office. I think Mi Familia Vota also has a link on theirs.
Okay.
But ServiceArizona.com is great, and Arizona was one of the pioneers in online.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
They just ask you for your...
Yeah, really, the state has made it really easy to register online. All you need is your driver's license number, essentially, and to then obviously know where you live. And, of course, one of the most important things that I know the county does, as well as the Secretary of State's office does, is ask people to verify their information before Election Day. So take a couple of minutes, go online, make sure you're registered where you live, and that the information is accurate.
So basically updating your information if it changes. And basically you don't really create a profile then? You just go in through your driver's license?
Right. Because the MVD already has your driver's license information, and ServiceArizona.com operates under the Department of Administration with MVD. But the point that Matt makes about checking your information is incredibly important, because elections are a partnership between the voter and the folks running the elections, right? So we depend very much on folks bringing us information about maybe problems that they have personally or issues that they have at polling places, things of this nature. So we want that information to come to us so we can fix problems as quickly as possible, particularly when it comes to, like Matt said, individuals making sure that their information is updated. You can go online and check that pretty easily.
And let's go ahead.
And with that, there's opportunities as we're registering them to vote online or on the paper form to receive the permanent early voting. So to be a part of that, to get
Okay, so
your
when you
ballot.
register to vote online or just on paper, you have that option to request early voting, which means that so you're gonna basically vote by mail. Correct, as opposed to going to a poll place.
And that's why they're asking you to make sure you're updating your addresses so that the ballot is going to go to the right location. Lots of communities move, so just update your address and your ballot will be updated to you. So you can put it in the mail, you can drop it off. It makes the process that much easier. You have opportunity to look it over at your home, so you're not feeling stressed. You're not waiting in long lines.
Right. Now, Mr. Fontes, the last time you were with us, I think you expressed a hope that everyone would vote by mail. Is that accurate?
Well, the ballot by mail is a critical part of where Maricopa County's voters are going, and I think they're going that way across the country when they have the opportunity. So we've seen since we're looking back to numbers going back at least 10 years, maybe 12 years, and the trend lines are perfectly clear. There are less and less people showing up at polling places on Election Day Tuesday, and they're sending us their ballots in the mail or bringing their ballot by mail into us, having already voted that ballot so that we can process them. Those numbers of folks, the folks on the permanent early vote list, are increasing significantly. And in some cases, we have, like, for example, the special congressional election for Congressional District 8 that we recently had, more than 92% of the ballot that was cast were early vote ballots or ballot by mail ballots. Some of them were brought in on Election Day, and there was no line. They got it in the mail. They wanted to wait till Election Day, and then they just walked in and handed us their voted ballot inside of that affidavit envelope so we could check the signature just like everyone else that got it in the mail. It's a much more accountable and much more secure way for us to run the election.
Good.
And just to put a period on that particular thought, if we're really interested in improving turnout and participation, permanent early voting has done that in Arizona. People have statistically shown if they are receiving their ballot, they're returning that ballot at a much higher rate than polling place voters.
Real quick, do you think we're moving maybe in a few years to voting, online?
I can tell you right now that there's a lot of folks who are looking at that, but I don't know how serious those efforts are. The technology is improving in those areas, but the question of whether or not the voter wants to do that, whether or not it makes sense for us as administrators of elections to do that, there's still too many questions out there. But it's not something that we're going to ignore.
And briefly, Mr. Fontes, I remember the last time we had you that there was an issue with folks bringing in ballots of other people, like their parents or somebody maybe who cannot go. And what was the issue, or is the issue on that ones need to know?
We've never seen a major issue in that regard, but the state legislature decided to make it a felony for you to bring in somebody else's ballot under certain conditions. So, for example, if you live in the same household, you are exempted from that. So if you have, your tia lives at your house, you can bring her ballot in as long as you're, in the same household. If you're a family member, that's okay. If you're an election administrator, I can tell you I went to one of my law offices that I practice out on the side, and one of the attorneys there had his and his wife's ballot that he was going to drop in the mailbox, and I was like, I'll just take it in because I knew I would save the county, $1.50 in postage. So since I can do that by virtue of my office, I did. So there are some exceptions in that rule, but the reality is the legislature decided for whatever their rationale was, and I still don't have a really good set of facts to back it up, but they decided to make it a felony to help people bring in their ballots. We're still working on trying to figure out if there's other better solutions for
that
voting.
Potentially change that.
Well, we'll see. I'm not advocating for any changes right now.
And communities are still working together, and to have this open lines of communication to know about those exceptions so that the community knows, hey, my son can drop off my ballot for me. And also there's these opportunities for rides to the polls. And that's why the permanent early ballot is so important for folks. Because they don't trust the mail. They don't want to put it in. I personally do not put it in the mail. I walk it in. I bypass the line. And so folks folks are willing to work. Community effort is there to give folks a ride if they want to drop it off to the voting.
And let me just make a really quick point on that. And I get that you don't trust the mail, and that's fine. But if you go to maricopa.vote, there is a text or an email way that you can actually track your ballot. And we're working with the United States Postal Service now to be able to track that envelope at every point of scanning for the Postal Service.
Right.
So we can actually actively send you a text message when your ballot's coming, when we received it, when it's gone through signature verification, and then when it's been counted. We'll just text you or email you and let you know. So if you go to maricopa.vote, you can sign up for that service.
Matt, when there was the issue of voter fraud, with the last election, I know the Secretary of State, Michelle Reagan, was very outspoken about the fact that it didn't, and it was we have a good system. Any thoughts on that?
The Secretary believes that Arizona's laws do a great job to prevent voter fraud. Okay. Can you unequivocally say it does not happen anywhere in this country? No. We've prosecuted probably nearly a dozen cases of double voting. Now, that's a form of voter fraud. If people
now,
are
when you
voting
say
in
dozen cases, that's literally 12 people, 12 votes.
Yeah, it's somewhere right around 12 to 20 over the last, since I've worked at Secretary of State's office. The Attorney General has prosecuted those cases, and that I think shows people that we are on the lookout for it. Does it happen at a statistical rate that is impactful? Probably not.
Right.
But it's important to know that even one case of voter fraud is too many, and government needs to be on the lookout for that.
Perfect. Any other thoughts on voter fraud?
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't exist on a widespread level in any way, shape, or form. There's no facts. There's no science to prove that. It was created as some kind of weird political mythology by, these folks who want to keep people from having faith in our system. And our system works well because there are government officials of all political persuasions. I mean, Michelle Reagan's a Republican, I'm a Democrat, but we work well together, office to office. There's, Republican recorders around the state who are also working on this. I am absolutely 100% confident that the accusations that are false about widespread voter fraud in the 2016 election were designed specifically to make people believe less in the integrity of our election system, and that's just wrong. And we got to speak out against it whenever it comes up because people, for some reason, want to think that there's a problem. There are minor issues. For example, Matt said 12 cases, but that's 12 cases out of, I don't know, probably close to 10 million different ballots that have been cast, if not more. So, again, statistical anomalies, like you're more likely to get hit by lightning than to find a case where someone's actually committing voter fraud. So the mythology has to be busted, and the reality is the facts and the data actually show a different story. We have a decent, hardworking set of people in government who are working hard to make sure that there is integrity in these systems and that we're improving not only the accountability and the voter experience, but the security of these systems as well.
Mi familia vota. You are on the ground. You see a lot of what's going on with the Latino community. Any final thoughts as to how you see the Latinos understanding the political process and engaging in it?
They're definitely taking a larger interest in what's happening. They've seen that, think about what issues are impacting their families and how their vote is going to matter. They are, like I said, not voting for themselves, but as a community and as their families. So that's one piece. The other piece is that we think about the millennial Latinos and what they care about and how they're coming out and turning out in record numbers and what's going to happen in 2018 at the end of the year is going to be great. They are going to show up. They are going to be loud, and they're going to go out and talk to their friends about voting. It's this social pressure of like, hey, why are you not registered to vote? And that's exactly what we need for them to be having those conversations. From education to environment to immigration, all of these pieces are going to play a key factor in how they're going to be voting. And they are going to be tech savvy, and they are going to get those text messages to know about their ballot. They also are going to sign up for permanent early voting to make sure that they can walk their ballot into the polling locations. Right. And they also want their stickers to put it on their social media. That's all.
It's all about the sticker,
right? It's all about the sticker. So they're going to turn out, and they're going to be a voice to be reckoned with.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt Roberts from the Secretary of State, Alicia Contreras from Mi Familia Vota, Adrian Fontes, County Recorder, Maricopa County Recorder. Thanks to you also for joining us today. We hope this was that you enjoyed this program and you learned something. Have a great week. This was AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection.